Okay, I got to hit the got it button. Right? Okay, got it. Oh, look at all those people.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Northshire Presents virtual event. It's great to see so many people here. My name is Davith Wood. I'm the events manager at Northshire's Manchester, Vermont location, and I'm here as almost always, my good friend and colleague, Rachel Person from Northshire's Saratoga Springs, New York location. Just a few things before we get started, and Rachel introduces our authors tonight. We are, as you noticed when you came in, recording this event. But don't worry, only those of us who are unmuted and in this nice little yellow box will be showing up for perpetuity on YouTube later on. So, for that reason, if at any point you have a question, please type them in the chat. Rachel and I will save those up, and we'll ask them at the Q&A bookstores. In the last couple of years, particularly.
Davith, we seem to be losing you, so I'm going to cut in and finish your introduction and then do the rest of the introductions. I just wanted to say, any questions that you have this evening, please put them in the chat. And thank you so much for being here tonight. I am so very pleased to get to be the one to welcome SJ Rozan to our screens this evening. She is here this evening to talk about Family Business, the newest novel in her Lydia Chin, Bill Smith series. She has won multiple awards for her fiction, including the Edgar, Seamus, Anthony, Nero, and Macavity Awards, the Japanese Maltese Falcon, and the Private Eye Writers of America Lifetime Achievement Award. He is joined tonight by fellow award-winning author and friend of Northshire, Jonathan Santlofer, whose most recent novel, The Last Mona Lisa, was listed as one of People magazine's best books of summer. Please join me in welcoming them both to our screens this evening.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, SJ. I'm so happy to be here because I love Northshire. I'm a devoted Saratoga Springs person, a Yaddo person. So nothing made me happier than when Northshire actually opened their bookstore in Saratoga Springs. And it's great to be here with the terrific crime writer SJ Rozan, her latest book, Family Business. I'm proud to say that we are also friends and have been for a number of years. So SJ, questions for you. I was thinking about you today in a serious kind of professional way. Thinking how you've had several standalone books, a particularly poignant one, Absent Friends, about 9/11. But this series, that Family Business, is part of the Lydia Chin and Bill Smith series. This is your 14th book in the series, correct? Right. I have that right, right? Okay. So
I sometimes look at the shelf and I wonder who the hell wrote all those books. You know?
I wrote a few of those, didn't I?
Did you? The good ones, right?
Yeah, I wrote the good ones. So there's a couple of things here that I wanted to say about that. Series books often, they can run into trouble, and you have a very unique thing that you did and have done with this book, which is you alternate the books between a Lydia book and then a Bill book. So this is a twofold question, and you can talk about this to some extent for the audience, which is, one, how a nice girl from the Bronx created Lydia Chin and Bill Smith in this series, and then how you decided that you would alternate books to keep this series alive.
Okay, I'm going to take the first one. Goes like this. From a young age, I was a fan of the Private Eye. Private Eyes in those days were all that iconic male voiceover, Robert Mitchum kind of guy. And I loved that idea that someone just outside the power structure was rescuing people. And I got more into it as I got older. So when I decided to write, that was the character I wanted to create, that iconic, world-weary white male, because that's a voice that, because of who he was born, a middle-class, healthy, straight white guy, could really have anything that he wanted. but the price was too high. It was the price of his soul. And so he decided not to do it, to maintain his integrity, but to step outside and see if he could rescue people who got caught in the undertow. So that was the voice I wanted to write in. So I started writing in that voice. And at the time I started, all the private eyes had sidekicks. The original private eyes, Philip Marlowe, Sam Spade, these guys did not have sidekicks. They were very much loners. But when I started, they all did. And the sidekick was exactly like the private eye, except he was crazy. So that if there was anything the private eye didn't want to do because it was a moral issue, like there's somebody shooting at me from that house in the hills and I wish he weren't, you tell the sidekick and the sidekick goes away and he comes back and he says, took care of it. And that to me is an abdication of moral responsibility. The private eye form to me is about moral ambiguity. And so I thought, okay, if Bill Smith has a sidekick, it has to be somebody who can put everything he's doing on shaky ground. So it has to be someone as different from him as possible. A woman, someone small, someone young. And then, oh, well, what the hell? Let me make her from a totally different cultural background. And then everything he thinks is obvious can be called into question. So I thought, okay, Bill Smith, Lydia Chin is the side.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second because I just want to ask questions. By the way, I hope nobody can hear the incredible crushing garbage trucks outside my huge windows. I mean, they're insane. So you started with Bill Smith as your private eye, and then you wanted to expand him or counter him in some ways with a sidekick, and you chose a kind of opposing or opposite kind of figure. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
that's, yeah. And once I decided to make her from a different cultural background, I had always been interested in Chinese art and culture. And people have asked over the years, where did that start? And honestly, I don't know. But I have always been interested in Chinese literature, Chinese music. I don't remember when I first heard a Peking opera, but I loved it. And I mean, I know I loved it from the beginning because I still go. I don't know where that came from, but I do know that because I was so interested, and because I had spent some time in college studying Chinese literature and so on, I thought if there were any culture that wasn't mine that I could have any chance of getting right, it would be the Chinese American culture. So I made Lydia Chinese American, which then started a whole bunch of research, which involved eating lots of meals in Chinatown and stuff like that. I read all the young Chinese writers to see what was on their minds, and I went and looked at art and all this stuff. So I started writing Lydia as sidekick, and that lasted about halfway through the first book. And then, Lydia basically said, yeah, okay, this is fine, but I want a book of my own, because it's a real waste of time to create this whole entirely different point of view from his and then not use it. And I thought, she has a point. So I thought, okay, I'll write a Lydia book and I'll use Bill as the sidekick. And how cool will that be? I thought I was writing two separate series. I thought that may even have two separate publishers, Bill Smith, who is this dark, world-weary private eye, and Lydia Chin, who had a whole other thing going. And this is the absolute truth, which I can now tell. I didn't know this for years. The first two books went to my first publisher, my first editor, who was Keith Kayla at St. Martin's. And he called my agent and he said, this is great, and I'll take them both, but only if she's planning to continue this alternating narrator thing, which is what she's doing, right? So my agent called me and he said, they want the books, but they want an alternating narrator. Will you do that? And I said, oh, I think that sounds great. I wish I'd thought of it. Yeah, I'll do it as an alternating narrator series, sure. And he called Keith back and said, yeah, that's what she's planning. And that was that. And he didn't tell me that till years later. So
SJ, this is a crazy question, but because I'm sure when you're inside each of those characters and those particular books, which I think are similar in many ways, but also quite different because the points of view are different. I guess you would, I was going to say, do you have a preference for writing one or the other, or is it simply that once you're in the head of that particular character, it carries you?
Yeah, once I get into that voice, that's then what I'm seeing the world through those eyes. And I do have to say, though, as I get very close to the end, once I can see the end, I cannot wait to get to the other voice.
Really?
Because he is so gloomy and she is so chipper. And, they both drive me nuts. And so, I'm always relieved to get back to the other one.
Okay.
And that takes me about, a quarter of the way through the book until I'm really very used to it. It's interesting what you see in the world. And Jonathan, this must happen to you all the time too. And I know there are other writers here to whom it happens. It's interesting what you see in the world based on whose eyes you're looking through.
Yeah.
And so if you're working with a particular character in a particular mood, you're seeing things as you go through your day that you might not notice, or you might take a different way if you weren't using those eyes. And I find that really interesting.
It's fascinating. And the reason I, of course, asked that ridiculous question because of, I know as a writer how I feel, but when I'm reading your books, and I've read probably most of them, when I'm reading a Bill Smith book, I think, I like Bill better. And then when I'm reading a Lydia Chin book, I think, no, I like Lydia better. But I'm going to read a quote from you. You said, Lydia is me when I was her age. Bill, on the other hand, is me now. You want to elaborate? So you become the grumpy, hard-boiled one? Is that it?
Yeah. When I was Lydia's age, the thing about Lydia is that she not only thinks the world can be righted, can be saved, she thinks she can help do it. And that used to be me. And now I think if it can be saved and righted, it is by people her age. I am too cynical isn't the right word, but I just don't see the road right now. And so the classic private eye of Bill's type, it was John D. MacDonald, who jaded, yes, Chris Aldrich just said jaded. Yes, indeed. John D. MacDonald's private eye, Travis McGee, used to talk about how the world was going to hell and there was nothing to be done about it, but you could save one person. The one person who came to him could be saved. And it didn't matter in any big sense because everybody was going to hell anyway, but he could do that one thing. And that's kind of Bill. And Bill is counteracted, counterweighted, counterlifted by Lydia, who basically says, come on, let's go, we can do it. And one of the things he loves about her is her enthusiasm and optimism. So yeah, I think that it's kind of interesting that both characters are me, and I keep being desperate to get out of one head to get into the other.
Well, everybody always wants to know, are you your characters? And there are some of us, some of a writer always in their characters, but I mean, I think there's a lot of creation, obviously, in those characters. And Bill and Lydia have changed over those 14 books. I mean, they have grown, their relationship has changed. Do you want to talk about that for a minute? And then we'll... look at
Yeah,
this.
I want to say that people often ask, do I have to start the series at the beginning? And I say no. Only two things change. One is my writing gets better, because one always hopes one's writing gets better because the alternative is just appalling. But the other thing that's changed is that is the relationship between Bill and Lydia, but it has changed with the speed of an acorn becoming a mighty oak. So it's not like from book to book, you will have missed anything. There is in Paper Sun a step. Usually it's a very, very, very shallow ramp. And then in Paper Sun, there's a step. But aside from that, and at the end of Winter and Night, there's a little rocky patch. But, it doesn't matter.
I did not read your books in order. And I feel like those books are very contained.
Yeah.
Very contained. You don't, I mean, it's really fun when people discover a writer, and I hope people watching, I suspect a lot of them already are your fans, but if they're not, it's so exciting because they have 14 books to choose from. And I do, while we're here at Northshire, of course, I recommend that you get some books from Northshire. But
get Jonathan's too. Get the last Mona Lisa while you're there.
Thank you. I will, that will shift me into something else when you mentioned The Last Mona Lisa, my book. So I'm going to go back and forth with this book and your other books, SJ, but it reminds me that you are not only a terrific writer, but a terrific teacher of writing. And that when we were in Assisi, Italy together, I sat in on your writing classes and you helped me with The Last Mona Lisa. And so, I kind of wonder, can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? And then we'll go back to specifically the books. And then we can talk about teaching as well. But let's talk a little bit about your process. I know you write in the mornings. I know you wander around the city like a crazy person and you take pictures and then you write. But you also obviously have this very quiet, very dedicated time that you write every day.
Yeah. I like to write in the morning. I like to go out before I write. First, I have my caffeine. Then I go out and I wander around a little bit like a crazy person. I take pictures. I look around. I see. And this is because I practiced architecture for 20 years. And I got up in the morning and went to the office. And I feel now like I can't just roll over into the living room. People say, oh, you writers are so lucky you can just, work in your pajamas. I can't do it. I feel like I never woke up. So I get dressed, I go out, I come back, and then I sit down and I write for 3 or 4 hours. And some of that is rewriting. I always reread everything I wrote yesterday. Sometimes I go back before that, and then I move forward. And 3 or 4 times in the course of a book, I will just absolutely be so stuck. I don't know, because I don't outline. I don't know. I mean, this is that, the perennial question, but I don't know how people do outline. And so I will look at the book and say, who are all you people and why are you here? And what are you doing? And what are you doing to each other? And does anybody have a clue? And I will move physically from the place where I am now, which is at my writing desk, over to the couch or to there's a rocking chair in the bedroom where it's very sunny. The whole apartment is sunny, but the bedroom is sunny later in the day. And I'll sit there with a yellow pad and I'll write, what has happened and what could happen next and who could be doing what and with which and to whom and what questions haven't I answered, and something will emerge. And then I'll come back and I'll be able to write, another quarter of the book or so. And so and my whole method is this iterative, I go back and forth and back and forth. So I am not one of those write a first draft and then see what happens people. I'm once my first draft is done, I have reread everything in it 197 times. Then I reread the whole thing. And I always keep a pad beside the computer to write questions that need to be answered, but they can be answered later. Like go back and make sure that you've put in so-and-so's wife sooner, because I didn't know so-and-so had a wife until later in the book. So or, was that Mott Street or Mulberry Street? It doesn't matter. It just needs to be consistent. So I just write that down. And when I'm really, 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 really stuck, I will do some of that because it has to be done. And so by the time I'm done, I have read the book a million times. Then I send it to my agent. And of course, then what happens is what happens with all the best agents. He gets back to me, not within half an hour, the way he should, but a number of days later, and he says, "Oh my God, this is brilliant. This is the best book you ever read. I love this book so much. This is fabulous. It's just a couple things."
Right.
And then 4 single-space pages later, you look at his couple things and you think, can I like stab myself with an adjective, and so then I do
Or
that.
him. Or
Oh, can I stab him? Right. That's even better. Right.
I think so. Yeah.
And so then I do that stuff, and then we send it to the publisher. I do want to say that as far as setting goes, I won't write about a place I've never been. And
Can
this
we?
includes-
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
not just Shanghai, but Maspeth, Queens. If I need a setting in part of the city, and my next book, the next Bill Smith book, is going to take place all over the city, and so this is my excuse to go running around. I think somebody recently said, like a crazy person, and go everywhere and take photographs. I love to take photographs, eat a lot of different foods, this kind of thing. And so that it also happens that I will go someplace and see something and think, oh, that needs to be in a book. And, 2 books later, I'll pull it out and think, oh, that tree, so there's that.
I was going to, it's funny because you jumped. There are so many things I want to talk about you as an architect, research, but one of the things I was thinking about is how place always plays an important part in your books, and that you have gone to the Mississippi Delta. You've taken us to Shanghai. So, and what you just said, I think it's very different. Thinking about a place, but when you go there, how it changes. How you are able to write about it, how you're actually able to see it, think about it, right?
Yeah, oh, it's totally different. The Mississippi book actually was not on my mind until I went to Mississippi, and I
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I learned some Mississippi history, and I thought, wow, if I was ever handed on a platter a Lydia book, this is it right here, and so I better write that. And then I went back 2 more times after I did some book research and some research talking to people who used to live there and that kind of thing. It's absolutely different. There is, when I decided to set a book in Hong Kong, I'd been there twice. I went back a 3rd time, and as soon as we got out of the metro or whatever they call it there, onto the street, I realized Hong Kong has a particular smell, which is roasting chickens and diesel oil and salt water that nothing else quite smells like. And I would not have remembered. And it brings back all kinds of stuff. The light in places is all different. The sound of footsteps, in marble halls, as opposed to halls paved with slate. I mean, it just is different. I feel like you have to go there. And then when you come back with your photographs and your memories, then you look at maps and then you look at buildings and stuff, but you have to go there. I know when you went to Florence, you came back with all kinds of, oh my God,
Yeah, I rewrote the whole book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But
so
there is, Esther, that, there's, particularly when you travel for research for a book, you then, when you come back and you're rewriting and you're using all this, you also have to be very careful, right? Because you have all of this stimulus and you have to, of course, not write a travelogue.
Yes.
So that is very important, how you use it. It stimulates so many things that you've been thinking about and all of that. But, and then is when, as a writer, you're editing yourself as to what you've seen, what you're going to use.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much stuff that I learned about Shanghai during World War II that I wanted to put, because it was an unbelievable place, and I wanted to stuff it all into the Shanghai Moon. And at one point I thought, these two characters right here, they are fabulous. They were based on actual characters who were in Shanghai at the time, but they really have no role in this book. You're really shoehorning your characters around to get them to meet these people. So I put them aside, and I do have another Shanghai book planned, my big opus for eventually.
Really? Oh,
for eventually, yeah. For
well,
not
I mean,
now.
I think that's the amazing thing about all kinds of research is that it,
Yeah.
you may use it and you may not. So in family business, let's talk a little bit about this book, about this Chinese crime boss who doesn't ruin anything to tell people he dies, because that's right at the beginning. It's right away, and it sets the book in motion. So one thing, I mean, the book pits preservation against real estate, which as a New Yorker, of course, you would immediately know about. But I don't think you know much about the Chinese crime organization. So what sort of research, well, I don't know, but what sort of research did you have to do for that?
Yeah, I am not, to my knowledge, personally acquainted with any Tong members or the Chinese Tongs and Triads are the organized crime groups in Chinese culture, like the non-existent mafia and all that. When you're the mafia, the Black Hand, the dark societies, they go by different names, and so do the Chinese organizations. In the US, they're Tongs. In Hong Kong and the mainland, they're Triads. And there are also Tongs in Hong Kong, of which the American Tongs are
all right, just
branches.
get
Okay.
back to the crime, because my
Yes.
brain's starting to explode with that. Okay.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah, right.
So yes, the Tongs ran Chinatown from the late 1800s when they developed in China. The Tongs and the Triads developed in China as protection organizations against both the European interests in China and regular, bandits and street gangs and stuff. And if you joined one, it was a mutual protection thing. If somebody tried to rob your store, all the other merchants would come running. And if they tried to rob the store next door, you were expected to go running. And that's how they started. And then, of course, they turned into the kind of protection racket where, you have a really nice store here, it'd be a shame if something happened to it. And so on. And so they were very powerful in New York until really the late 80s and 90s, and they're still going. The Tongs still have a certain amount of power. Once the NYPD, a little light bulb went off over its head, and they realized that if they had Chinese-speaking officers, they would do better at preventing crime. The other interesting thing that happened is that the NYPD really wasn't interested in crime in Chinatown until the Chinese from Fujian started importing drugs. That was a sort of line that they shouldn't cross. Otherwise, they were just exploiting other Chinese who cared, and that was really the attitude. But once you start importing drugs and selling them to white people, then, that can't go on. And so the Tongs started losing power, started shrinking, but they're still there, and they're still involved in all kinds of local crime and such like.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not that hard to find out about them. They make peripheral appearances in books like Gangs of New York, and although that was said a little earlier, once you start doing that research, there are rabbit holes to go down. The most interesting thing is the names they use for, which I use in family business, for their different levels, and they take this very seriously. To be a red pole or a white paper fan or a straw sandal means something in the Tong, and you don't laugh at that. If someone tells you he's a red pole. In fact, if he tells you he's a red pole, you really need to be scared, because he came to beat the crap out of you. So
I'm sorry, did you decide, was there something you read that brought you to this crime world? It made sense to me that you would do this. It's perfect Lydia book, and how you tie it into her in this relationship. But was there something specifically that brought you to that, or you were just looking to write about the crime world in Chinatown because you've done so many other things about Chinatown in this series? You know what I'm saying?
No, that's an interesting question. I think what happened is that I wanted to deal with the real estate issue. That is, there you are. The book concerns, for those of you who haven't read it, the attempt to put together a real estate parcel for a very big building in Chinatown, which would essentially destroy Chinatown. And I wanted a holdout building. And I thought, what the hell landlord is going to hold out against a very large payment? These buildings are not owned by the people who live in them. They're owned by landlords who own 6 or 8 buildings in Chinatown. And I thought, well, a Tong would hold out. A Tong would have reasons to hold out, because they are not less powerful than the developer.
Well, I thought it was interesting, actually, all of the different motives around the real estate, those who want it, who you wouldn't suspect would want it sold, and things like that. But so you wanted to deal with that issue and then created this book around it. Is that what happened?
Yeah, it was that issue. I always want an issue, or a world that has issues. I did Mandarin Plaid. It had to do with the fashion world, how the people who are sitting sewing in the sweatshops, and way up at the top, the supermodels and the designers, and it's the same world. And so the real estate world, I wanted to deal really with the real estate world, which involved the crime world in this case. So that's that.
I know that you've been, I keep cutting you off. Please forgive me.
That's okay.
I know that because I have other, and then you set off questions in my head, like, I don't think I ever asked you in relation to The Art of Violence, your last book, which I totally loved also, one that was quite near and dear to me coming out of the art world at one point. But what precipitated that book? It's totally fun book. Filled with bloodshed and complex and insane art people. I love it. But what brought you to that? Why that? You saw that as something you wanted to look at specifically, or it presented itself, or?
Well, the art world, it's a Bill Smith book, The Art of Violence, and the art world has always fascinated me. I did Ghost Hero, and then the first one, China Trade, was actually more museums than art. But the art world fascinates me because there's such a disconnect between money and value. And the other thing, the thing that precipitated that book was really many years ago, the case of now I've forgotten his name, but you remember, the guy that Norman Mailer and that crowd got out of prison.
Got out of jail, and then he killed the person. Yeah.
And he killed someone. He was an extraordinarily talented writer. Right. But he was also kind of feral. He'd been raised in foster homes. He had no anger management techniques at all. And they got him out because he was so talented. There was this huge movement to get him out.
Yeah.
They got him out, and 6 months later, he stabbed someone because he was pissed off,
Right.
basically. And so he's back in for the rest of his life. There's someone dead, and Jack Abbott. Thank you, Marjorie. And and Norman Mailer, and that crowd is just going, oops, and it's like, what kind of that just, and so that has always fascinated me, that case, and whose responsibility was
And you-
what.
you
And
kind of play with that character in
Yes.
The Art of Violence too.
yes, that's what I wanted. That's what I
yeah.
wanted to do, but I wanted the character to be more ambiguous. And I also didn't want it to be a writer. I wanted, and so I moved him into the art world, which I love to explore anyway. And that, because in the art world, as opposed to as a writer, he could instantly become a huge valuable commodity,
Right.
and not want to be. And so that was why I did that. And then I just, there was the art world in front of me, and I just couldn't resist. I
Yeah.
also want to point out that there's an architect in that book too.
Well, yes, and I want to move there so that it was mentioned before, but you're an architect, and you studied architecture, and you were a working architect for many, many years. And I can think of at least one of your novels that uses that very specifically. But are there ways that your architecture background, you think, has influenced and shaped your writing in other subtle ways that you could talk about? Because I think our training in different fields sets us up for other things.
Yeah, I think you're right. In the case of architecture, one thing is I learned to walk around and look at stuff. Architects do that a lot, and look at specific stuff. Some days you walk around and just look at windows all over the place. But also, architecture is an art that involves working back into the thing and back into it and back into it. You start with a big idea, and then you think, well, if that's the idea, then I have to do this and I have to do that, and then I have to do this. But if I do this, then that first this that I did needs to be, and so it is that iterative process that I use in my writing. That's how architecture works. So that I think that's one of the things I learned, is that you don't need to be afraid of having to go back and having to rework something. And if you decide at a certain point that what the building as it has evolved, that the issue is you can't use the north side for the entrance. That's the problem, even though that was the original impetus. Let's come up the hill and come in the north side, and that's the thing that's making it all not work. You have to be willing to let that go. And that is what I think I take from architecture. Also, architecture takes a long time. It takes weeks, and the clients will call up and say, listen, my schedule has changed, could I have it Tuesday? And the answer is no, you really can't, because it takes 5 people 3 weeks to do what you want, and we're only in the second week, and it's 5 people, and you can have it maybe Friday if everybody works 16 hours a day, but it takes time. And that's all. The other thing I learned is that you sit down to write a book, and if it isn't written in a week, that's kind of normal, and you just keep going. And the other thing about architecture is that there are times when you get stuck, and you got to call the guy over from the next desk and say, I can't figure out how to whatever. And, then you both walk around it a little bit, and then the guy from the next desk says, it seems to me. And that same thing happens when you're writing. You call your friends and say, will you read this goddamn thing? Because I don't know what's going on here. And if you're lucky, you have someone who will read it for you and say, well, it seems to me that I had one book where, and I said this, I think, Amy, at the book club that I did for you, I had a book where I gave it to a friend to read, and she said, well, I don't really know, what to tell you, but boy, have you brought out the racism of that guy's mother. I said, racism? She said, yeah, well, that's why he won't let her marry the Chinese girl, let him marry the Chinese girl. And I said, it is? I thought it was just because he was rich and the Chinese girl was poor. Oh my God, no, are you kidding? So that became a major part of the book. I didn't know it was there. So, that all those things come from architecture. People sometimes ask, did I, is it a matter of learning how to make structure and stuff? That does not translate. But the time, the time and the bye Chris, the time and the iteration,
the discipline, but also I think that whole sort of metaphor you used of like suddenly you realize the north side entrance, which is a very basic thing, isn't going to work. And as an organic writer, which is the way you write, you have to be willing to let go of what you've been holding on to so dearly to make the book live, right?
Yeah. And it's always a surprise when you think I got to let go of that. But as soon as you realize it, and I know this is true for you too, as soon as you realize it, and you're fighting it like crazy, but as soon as you realize it, it's right.
Yeah.
And it takes like sometimes a week to actually let it happen. No, I can do it. I can do it. My grandfather used to say, you're doing like this. And it takes sometimes a week to stop doing that and say, it's not this, it's this.
Well, it just reminded me very quickly that when I went to art school and we did this Hans Hofmann exercise where we would do a drawing for a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks. And at the end of that period, we'd rip the drawing up and then we'd glue down the pieces and start again. And it taught us not to be, as you're talking about with architecture, as a sort of substructure or a mindset, not to be tied down to something. Also that you're your own inventory, those torn up pieces, all that stuff that it's there for you to use. So, and I think I'm always amazed in your books because, and this one too, at times feels very complex with the story, but it's a balancing act and you're always balancing. And, it's the reason why, I not only want to get back to your books, but I'm like, reading them like that, because I think that sort of substructure of, that's something we can, in a minute, we'll take questions from real people, but that whole idea of consciously, and if you think about that, consciously creating suspense, since you are a crime writer, do you think about that consciously in structuring your books or re-editing them, or
in generally in the re-editing? When there's a thing in family business that I introduced poorly the first time I did it, and I thought, I can't believe you're just coming out and saying that when you could let it simmer for chapters here and then have a big aha later on. So I rewrote that. But the suspense mostly comes from the fact that I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know who these people are. So neither does the reader when I start. And a lot of it comes from the emotional connection. When Lydia's brother shows up at that funeral, right away, Lydia's going, oh my God, what is he doing here? And he's actually not doing anything except, being snide to her because he does. That's the way he acts. But you're, because of her reaction, I hope the reader, I was thinking, well, what else is going on here? This is just, Tim can't just come to this funeral and then go away. He has to have, this has to mean something that's not going to be good. So
but I think that is true, particularly of crime writing, which I think makes crime writing very difficult, as opposed to sometimes, let's say, literary fiction, although I don't like to separate any genre at all. But I think everything has to mean something. I think that of any novel. I don't think you can dump something in there that doesn't have resonance in your book. Otherwise, I don't think you're a
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It has to resonate. It all has to
thinking
resonate.
writer. But yeah,
Yeah.
right. I think we're going to turn this over. Am I right, Rachel, to you for your
Wait,
questions? What?
Yeah, we've
But
got some
yes.
great audience questions, but go ahead, SJ, sorry.
No, the one thing I wanted to say, Jonathan, we didn't get
Yeah.
back to teaching, and I
Oh,
do
yeah,
want to
yeah.
say, I just want to say, I do teach, and some of my students are here. Hi, guys. I'll see you later in the evening. And if anybody is working on a book, and you have this urge to come to Italy and work on it in Assisi this summer, we will be doing that. We didn't run the workshop the last 2 summers because COVID, but we are doing it this summer, God damn it. And late July to mid-August. So go to my website. You can find it from there. And you'll have a wonderful time.
You will have
That's
a
all.
wonderful time. I was there teaching with SJ and also learning from SJ. It was one of the few times that when I complained about my book, you didn't laugh at me first. You took me very seriously because I was in your class. She's really a great writing teacher. So, you get Italy, even if she's not a great writing teacher, you're going to have fun, but she is. Okay, Rachel, take it away. Thanks, SJ.
That trip sounds heavenly. So
Yeah.
any writers in the group, I would get on that. We do have some great audience questions, and other audience members, if you would like to type them into the chat, we'll get to as many as we can. But the first one that came from Marjorie. SJ, you are invested in the Baker Street Irregulars, a wonderful honor. Can you talk about your relationship with Sherlock Holmes?
Oh, Sherlock and I, we're like this. Actually, we're like this. Yeah, I am the Imperial Palace at Peking. When you get invested, you get a name from the stories. It's either a character or it's a phrase uttered by someone at some point. And I am the Imperial Palace at Peking. I am sort of a thief in the night in the Irregulars, because I am not nearly the Sherlockian that some of these people are. They write learned papers and all kinds of stuff. I have written a couple of Sherlock pastiches, but I love these people. And yeah, it was just the big Sherlockian weekend was just in New York. And there was the big dinner at which men wear tuxes and occasionally kilts. They wear all their military medals. Some of the women wear gowns, because it's always 1895. That's one of the mottos of the Baker Street Irregulars. It's always 1895. And it's just a lot of fun. These are very smart, very dedicated people. They're just focused on, Sherlock Holmes and Watson, and, proving that Watson was, a woman, that Watson and Sherlock were gay, that Watson never even existed, which of course he didn't, because there was a writer involved. The whole thing is just great. It's just a wonderful. There was a paper given that about how Sherlock Holmes had met William McKinley just before McKinley was shot. It was really great. So yeah, I love the Sherlockians, even though I feel like I'm there under false pretenses.
Thank you, SJ. Dottie has a question for you. She says, is your agent also your editor?
No. Well, in my case, yes, because my agent is a good editor. So he will read the book and I'll rewrite it according to what he and I, sometimes I'll say, are you crazy? And sometimes I'll say, I agree. In general, but no, the editor is at the publisher. The editor works for the crucial difference is your agent works for you and the editor works for the publisher. So the editor wants the book to make as much money for the publisher as it can and be a good book. Your agent wants it to be a good book so he can sell it to a publisher for as much money as he can get. It's a little different. A lot of agents don't read or just aren't good editors. That's why they're in the agent business, not the editing business. But I'm very lucky. I've had 2 agents and they've both been good at that part of the process.
So the next question is another one from Marjorie, saying, I've already read and loved Family Business. Could you talk about your decision to use real places in Chinatown, like the Fei Da Bakery?
I try to use real places whenever I can, as long as something terrible is not going to happen in them. Or as long as I'm not saying the guy who runs it is, part of the town. The Fei Da Bakery, and I forget what else I used in that book, but there was another bakery on Canal Street, the park with the fortune tellers outside. They're all that stuff is real. And I do that all over New York. I use real places, especially restaurants, because generally bad things don't happen in restaurants. I tried to use one in one of the books, and suddenly the legal team at that was my old publisher. Suddenly they said, no, you can't use a real place. And I said, but I've been using real places all along. No, you can't. Lydia doesn't like the people. She went in and she's very snobby about who they are. Well, and so you can't use it. So I didn't use it. I changed the name, and I walked by there the other day, and the place is closed. So I just want to say, it could have been famous and stayed open, but anyway, yeah, I try to, there's the Fei Da Bakery is the favorite of one of the people in the book, and I recommend it also, especially those long pulley red bean rice cakes. They're really good.
I have a question next, which is something I always wonder for writers with long-standing series, which is, have you ever reached a point where you realize that you had boxed yourself in with something you wrote in a book earlier in the series that you think, oh, I wish I'd done that differently? Oh,
interesting. No, well, except for Bill and Lydia's pasts, which they had to come unhinged from time to, otherwise he'd be 75 and she'd be 50 by now. She'd be 60, which is not happening. So, the kind of details of their past, but otherwise, no, I have not yet done something that has pushed me into doing stuff now that I don't want to do. So, but I know other writers to whom that's happened, and they're just, can I get away with this? If people are going to remember, but no, not yet.
Thank you so much. This has been such a delight. I'm afraid we've got time for only one more question, and that's from Rachel in the chat. She says, can you speak more to the relationship between Bill and Lydia and how you think their relationship may develop? Is that something that you feel is important to the future of this series?
Oh, I think it's really important. Yes, was that from Rachel, my niece? Hi, Rachel. Yeah, it's very important. I think the relationship between Bill and Lydia has been critical from the beginning, and it did not progress to the place where it is now, meaning they danced around each other for a long time until finally, and I didn't know when it was coming. I actually didn't see it coming. But I think one of the things that happens when there's a lot of sexual tension between two characters, and then they get together, is it can just flatten everything. It can ruin everything. And a way that writers sometimes handle it, and Dennis Lehane handled it this way, is that his characters got together and then blew apart. It didn't work. I didn't want to do that, but I also didn't want things to just flatten out, and they lived happily ever after kind of thing. And until I figured out how to make it work, I was goddamned if I was going to do it. They were just going to keep dancing around each other until the end of time. And I didn't realize I had figured it out until it happened. So I think for the foreseeable future, which means, into the next book, which is as far as I can foresee, they will continue as they are now, which is she's still living at home with her mother. And they're spending time together, but, in a don't ask, don't tell kind of way. eventually, I think they may move in together, although I can see that as a real problem for him, much more than for her. So I don't know. And I think, again, until I figure out how to deal with that in my subconscious, which does all the work, I'm not going to try it, because this is a big enough step. It took 11 books to get to that. So, but I don't think there will ever, I don't think there will ever be anyone else for either of them now that they've gotten together, except that, poor Jack Lee from Ghost Hero is pining away uptown. I would like to bring him back, but I think he because Lydia's mother was much fonder of Jack than of Bill, because he's in the same stupid private eye profession, but at least he's Chinese. But I don't think that that poor Jack has a chance, which is too bad, because I like Jack. But so that's
Yeah. You didn't talk about Lydia's mother, who I love.
Oh,
who's in
Lydia's
a
mother,
lot of
yeah.
books.
Yeah, let me just talk about Lydia's mother for 2 seconds. Lydia's mother is every first generation immigrant mother there ever was, is every ethnic mother. I once, my proudest moment was when a young Chinese guy was waiting to get a book signed in line, and when he came up, he said, "Listen, I just have one question. When did you meet my mother?"
I love that.
I loved it. But she really is, she's every mother who wants her child to succeed in America, but with the values of the old country. And that makes Lydia every first generation immigrant child born here, but with one foot in either place. Lydia's mother, pushes the envelope a little bit, because, she's in a book. But a lot of the things she does are things friends' mothers, people would say, "Oh my God, my mother, you won't believe what she did today." And, Lydia's mother got to do that. So I also want to say, and my sister Debbie is here, so don't get mad at me, Debbie. But I also want to say that when my mother, may she rest in peace, used to come to book signings with me, she would say to anyone who would listen, "I was not the model for Lydia's mother." And I would say, I rest my case, because if Lydia's mother went anywhere with Lydia, she would say the same thing. My mother was not the model, because she wasn't nearly as wacky as Lydia's mother, and she didn't try to interfere in our lives at the level of Lydia's mother. And yet, her mother was that first generation immigrant. So, the ethnic mothers are all alike in so many ways. And, Lydia's mother is just a distillation and a what do you call it when you boil something down until it's, the real essence of immigrant mother, of ethnic mother. And I believe that ethnic covers everybody. We are all ethnic in whatever eth we're in. So, she is your mother, folks.
Yeah.
I know she's Jonathan's mother because I knew Jonathan's mother.
Yeah.
So
That note of universality is a wonderful place to end on, I think. Although I could listen to the two of you go on all night, I know that we are out of time and I don't want to trespass too long on your evenings.
and
But
the two of
so
us, the two of us could go on all night and have. So
We have, but not publicly, or maybe somewhat publicly. Yeah. Thanks, SJ. Everyone really support your local bookstore.
yeah.
Great fun book to read. You'll be taken away in all the best ways. So
thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you, Jonathan and SJ, for a wonderful conversation. And everyone, you can find both of their books at northshire.com, as well as a list of upcoming events.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you so much.
thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.